I'm 89 years old, and for 47 years I've hidden an impossible truth in my basement. In 1978, I found a dying Sasquatch with a bullet in his chest and eyes that held human intelligence. I saved his life. I taught him to read and write. And when he finally learned enough words to tell me what he really thought about humanity, his answer was so devastating I've spent years trying to find the courage to share it. This is the story of how I taught language to a creature that shouldn't exist, only to discover that some beings understand us better than we understand ourselves, and their judgment isn't kind. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me where you're watching this story from. I'm 89 years old now, and for 47 years, I've carried a secret that would shatter everything science believes about intelligence, language, and the very definition of what it means to be human. In the basement of my home in Northern California, hidden from a world that would never understand, I taught a young Sasquatch to communicate. And when he finally learned to write his truth about humanity, his words revealed something so devastating about who the real monsters are that I've spent the last years of my life trying to find the courage to share it. This is the story of how a broken linguist found purpose in teaching language to a being that shouldn't exist, only to discover that some truths are too painful to speak aloud, but too important to die with me. I tell you this from my study, surrounded by 47 years of documentation. My hands, gnarled with arthritis and spotted with age, rest on a worn canvas notebook filled with handwriting that isn't mine. The letters are large, uneven, pressed deep into the paper by fingers too thick for comfortable writing. But the thoughts contained within are more profound than anything I encountered in 30 years of academic linguistics. Before me, in a simple wooden frame, is a photograph I took in 2010. A massive hand, easily twice the size of mine, holding a pencil. The image is slightly blurred, taken with trembling hands, but it captured something impossible. Proof that intelligence and consciousness exist in forms we've spent centuries denying. Some will call me insane, others will call me a liar, but I have evidence, journals, recordings, writings, and a hand that could never be human. And I have memories of a friendship that taught me more about language, thought, and the human condition than 4 decades of university research ever could. This is why, at 89, with my own death approaching like a patient visitor, I've decided the world needs to know that we are not alone in our capacity for abstract thought, and that the beings we've hunted, feared, and denied might understand us better than we understand ourselves. June 15th, 1978. The morning was cool in the Cascade Mountains of Northern California, about 40 miles northeast of Redding, where the forest grew so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy even at noon. I was 42 years old then, though I felt decades older. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and at that time I was no longer the promising linguistics professor from UC Berkeley who'd published groundbreaking work on language acquisition in children. I was just a broken man hiding in a cabin inherited from my father, trying to outrun the memory of finding my wife Sarah in our Berkeley bathroom 2 years earlier, her wrists slit, a note beside her apologizing for a depression she could no longer bear. The cabin sat on 37 acres of primordial forest, accessible only by a dirt logging road that turned to mud 6 months of the year. I'd moved there in late 1976, after my breakdown at the university, standing in front of a lecture hall full of graduate students, opening my mouth to discuss Chomsky's universal grammar, and instead bursting into uncontrollable sobs that didn't stop for 20 minutes. The department had been understanding, offering sabbatical, counseling, time. I'd offered my resignation instead. By 1978, my life had reduced to pathetic simplicity. I cataloged bird calls for a freelance biology project that paid just enough for canned soup and whiskey. I had a rotary phone that rarely rang, a battery-powered radio that picked up stations from Redding, and a record player with exactly 7 albums, mostly Debussy and Chopin, music Sarah had loved. Jimmy Carter was president. Stayin' Alive played endlessly on the radio. Iran was descending into revolution, and I was drinking myself toward oblivion in a cabin that smelled of mildew and failure. That June morning, I woke around 5:30 a.m. to absolute silence. Anyone who's spent time in deep forest knows that silence is wrong. The dawn chorus should have been deafening, thrushes, warblers, jays all competing for territory and mates. Instead, nothing. Just the whisper of wind through Douglas firs, and the distant murmur of the creek that bordered the southern edge of my property. Then I smelled it. Blood. Not the metallic tang of a small animal kill, but something heavier, richer, carried on the morning air like a warning. And underneath it, another smell I couldn't identify. Musky, organic, like wet fur and fear condensed into scent. I should have stayed inside. Should have assumed hunters had wounded a deer, that nature was simply taking its course. But 2 years of isolation had left me desperate for anything that broke routine. I pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, grabbed my father's old Winchester rifle, more for comfort than protection, and followed my nose into the forest. The blood trail started about 200 yards from my cabin, dark droplets on pine needles and moss. Not the spatter pattern of a running animal, but the steady drip of something moving slowly, deliberately, trying to conserve strength. I followed it for nearly a mile, my boots crunching on deadfall, my breath forming small clouds in the cool mountain air. The forest opened into a small clearing I'd never noticed before, a natural amphitheater ringed by old-growth sequoias that must have been 300 years old. And there, slumped against the largest tree, was something that made my mind struggle to process what my eyes were seeing. At first I thought, bear. Young grizzly maybe, wounded by poachers. But the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the shoulders too broad, the head too large and oddly shaped. It was roughly human in configuration but massively built, maybe 6 feet 3 inches even in its collapsed position, covered in irregular reddish-brown fur that was matted with blood and dirt. A Sasquatch. The word formed in my mind before conscious thought caught up. Bigfoot. The thing that didn't exist, that science had dismissed as hoax and folklore and misidentified bears, except it was 30 feet away from me, bleeding into the moss, and very, very real. I froze. Every campfire story, every warning about creatures in the woods, every rational voice in my head screamed to run. But my training, the careful observation skills honed through years of research, kicked in automatically. I began cataloging details. 3 gunshot wounds, 2 in the upper left chest, 1 in the left shoulder. Large caliber rifle, probably 36 or similar, based on the wound size. The creature was young, late adolescence, I guessed, based on the body proportions and the quality of the fur. Its breathing was shallow, rapid, labored. Blood bubbled from the chest wounds with each exhale, indicating probable lung puncture. One massive hand clutched at an exposed tree root, knuckles pale beneath the dark skin, holding on as if the physical connection to earth could anchor it to life. Then its eyes opened. I've spent my entire career studying human cognition and language development. I've looked into the eyes of hundreds of children at various stages of development, watched the moment when abstract thought begins to form, when self-awareness crystallizes. What I saw in those eyes, deep amber brown, set under a pronounced brow ridge, was unmistakable. This creature knew it was dying. It understood mortality. It was afraid. Not animal fear, the panicked flight or fight response of a cornered beast. This was existential terror, the conscious comprehension of imminent death, of existence ending, of a self that would cease to be. It looked at me, and in that gaze was a question. Are you going to finish what they started? My rifle felt heavy in my hands. I could end its suffering. One shot clean, and this impossible thing would stop being my problem. I could walk away, report nothing, return to my careful isolation and pretend this morning never happened. Instead, I lowered the rifle to the ground and took a step forward. The creature flinched violently, a whimper escaping from its throat, a sound that was neither human nor animal, but somewhere heartbreakingly between. It tried to move, to drag itself backward, but only managed to tear the chest wounds further. Fresh blood poured out, dark and arterial. I'm not going to hurt you, I said, my voice cracking from disuse. I hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. I want to help. Do you understand? Help. The creature watched me with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much awareness. Its chest heaved with the effort of breathing. I could hear fluid in the lungs, pneumothorax probably, air and blood filling the pleural cavity. I thought of Sarah, bleeding out on white tile while I was across campus teaching students about verb conjugation. I thought of arriving home to find her already cold, of the note that said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," in her careful handwriting. I couldn't watch another conscious being die while I stood by and did nothing. I ran back to the cabin, my 42-year-old body protesting the pace, and grabbed everything I could think of. The first aid kit I kept for logging accidents, clean towels, a bottle of bourbon I'd been drinking through slowly, duct tape, and a wool blanket. I filled a canteen with water from the pump and ran back, terrified I'd find the creature already dead. It was still there, still breathing, though more shallowly now. Its eyes tracked me as I approached, fear and hope warring visibly in its expression. "This is going to hurt," I told it, unscrewing the bourbon bottle with shaking hands. "But infection will kill you as surely as the bullets if I don't clean these wounds." I poured bourbon over my hands first, then over the chest wounds. The creature's entire body went rigid, a sound emerging from deep in its chest that was almost a scream, but not quite. Too controlled, too conscious of noise discipline even in agony. It was trying not to make sounds that might attract attention. Even dying, it was trying to hide. "I'm sorry," I whispered, pressing towels against the wounds to stop the bleeding. "I'm so sorry." For the next 3 hours, I worked with supplies meant for minor cuts and sprains to treat injuries that would challenge a field hospital. I cleaned the wounds as best I could, packed them with clean cloth, and wrapped the creature's massive torso with duct tape and torn towels. The shoulder wound had broken the clavicle, but missed major blood vessels. Lucky, if you could call any of this lucky. The chest wounds were worse, but at least they seemed to have missed the heart. The creature watched me work with those impossibly aware eyes. Sometimes it would make soft sounds, grunts that varied in pitch and duration. After a while, I realized they weren't random. The sounds had structure, pattern. It was communicating something, though I couldn't yet decode the meaning. When I finished, the sun was high and hot. The creature was still alive, though clearly in shock, shivering despite the blanket I'd wrapped around its shoulders. "You can't stay here," I said, more to myself than to it. "Someone shot you. They might come back to finish the job or collect their trophy. You need shelter. You need somewhere safe." The creature made a sound, 2 short grunts followed by a longer, lower one. It gestured weakly toward the forest as if trying to say it could manage on its own. "You can't even stand," I pointed out, "and those wounds need constant care for at least a week, maybe 2. If I leave you here, you die. Do you understand? Die." Something flickered in those amber eyes, recognition of the word maybe, or just understanding of my tone. I made a decision that would define the next 47 years of my life. "My cabin has a basement," I said slowly, clearly. "Storm cellar, really. Dark, quiet, safe. I can hide you there, tend your wounds, keep you alive." The creature studied me for a long moment. Then, incredibly, it nodded. A clear, deliberate nod of understanding and acceptance. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "You understand me." Another nod, smaller this time, as if conserving energy. Getting the creature to the cabin took 6 hours. It couldn't walk. Between the trauma and the injuries, its legs wouldn't support its weight. I fashioned a travois from branches and rope, laid the blanket over it, and somehow convinced this being that outweighed me by at least 400 pounds to let me drag it through the forest. We moved maybe 50 feet at a time before I had to rest, gasping, my back screaming, while the creature lay perfectly still and silent, despite the pain each movement must have caused. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was setting, and I was soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain air. The storm cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the cabin's main room, with stone steps leading down to a space about 15 by 20 feet, that my father had used for storing canned goods and tools. I'd never bothered with it, preferring to keep my few supplies upstairs. I cleared out the junk, laid down old blankets and sleeping bags, and then faced the problem of getting a 6'3", probably 600-pound creature down narrow stairs. It took another hour of painful maneuvering, with the creature helping as much as its injuries allowed, but eventually it was settled in the cool darkness below. I brought down water, some canned peaches, a kerosene lamp. The creature drank gratefully, using both hands to hold the mason jar I offered, but refused the peaches, making a negative sound and gesture. "Not hungry or don't eat fruit?" I asked. It gestured at its wounded chest, then at its mouth, and made a pained expression. "Too hurt to eat, I understand." I changed the bandages once more, pouring more bourbon on the wounds. The creature bore it stoically this time, though its fingers dug deep grooves into the dirt floor. When I finally climbed back up the stairs, leaving the trapdoor cracked for air, it was fully dark outside. I sat at my kitchen table, bourbon bottle in hand, and tried to process what I'd just done. I had a Sasquatch in my basement, a critically injured, impossibly intelligent being that science said didn't exist. If anyone found out, hunters, scientists, the government, they would take it away, study it, probably dissect it eventually, and I would be arrested or institutionalized or both. I took a long drink of bourbon and made my second life-defining decision in 12 hours. Whatever this creature was, it would stay hidden. I would protect it, heal it, and keep it safe from a world that would never understand. I just had no idea that safe would mean 47 years of captivity for a being that deserved to run free in the mountains it came from.